Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Good Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Yes, it's another episode. You know, 2 episodes in a week. I wouldn't quite say that episodes are like buses and you wait ages, because you don't, because I'm normally doing at least 1 a week, but this week I've managed to cram in an extra episode. So here we are, and I thought well, let's go back to looking at some whiskey, and I think this is pretty much first for the show, in that this is the first time I've done an entire episode about the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, and I've used their bottles over the years in various episodes, but it's mainly because I just don't have a tendency to come across them very often. As you probably know, they are an independent bottling company, but they don't sell to shops like us. Basically, it's a society. You have to be a member, and they only sell their bottles to their members, which is great. But that does mean I don't get to taste them very often. Fortunately, I was asked to judge this year's Independent Bottlers Challenge, as you know, and they entered a number into the various categories that I was tasting. So obviously I tasted both, well, more than just both, but grain, Lowland, Campbelltown, and non-Scotch, and they entered samples into everything, and I decided I picked what I considered to be the best that they had entered, and because, you know, at the end of the day, you know, let's make no bones about it, they're no different to any other independent bottling company. They will bottle some exceptionally good stuff, but they also in turn bottle some stuff that probably isn't quite so exceptional. And I must admit, you know, obviously like all episodes of the show, I'd rather focus on what they do well than what they don't do particularly well. So all of, like I said, today's samples I thought were exceptionally good. So basically, as I've not done an episode of the show fully on the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, I'll give you a little bit of history. It was founded in 1978 by a chap by the name of Philip Hills, who allegedly had a bit of a road to Damascus moment somewhere near Glen Scotia, I believe, and decided that he had to buy that whiskey. Well, fair enough. I mean, I suppose everybody's got to start somewhere. So he basically convinced a number of his acquaintances and probably friends and what have you to put their money into the pot and purchased said cask. And over time, the syndicate grew, shall we say, and more people invested, more casks were bought, until in 1982 sort of stroke 3, the society became a society. They opened it, the membership, to the general public, and allowed, you know, pretty much anyone to sort of, you know, become a member and purchase, and so on and so forth. Obviously at the time they also purchased the first of their 3 premises in called the Vaults in Leith. So they had a bar, I suppose, for want of a better word, or members' rooms, so that you could go to, you could taste, you know, buy a dram and taste it, or buy an entire bottle, or what have you. In '96 they launched a share scheme which allowed them to raise enough money to purchase their second property, which was the venue in Greville Street in London, which I went to many years ago, which is very nice. And their third property was purchased in 2004. They purchased a Georgian townhouse on Queen Street in Edinburgh, which is incidentally at the same time that the society was sold to Glenmorangie. Things kind of, I guess, ticked over. Glenmorangie eventually sold in 2015 to a group of private investors, so the society's kind of come full circle and is now, you know, an independent entity once more. And just last year they decided on a revamp of the labels for the to coincide with the 35th anniversary of the society. I can't remember exactly when they introduced the sort of the rather distinctive bottles they use, because originally they were using the sort of standard ones. I think they call them tall rounds in the industry, And I think one of the interesting things about the society is basically you can only buy from them directly, but also their use of cryptic names and phrases for the whiskies. They also don't actually state the distillery on the bottle. You have to basically know what the code number is. So I think it's a code number followed by a cask number, I believe. And up until this redesign, there was no age statement. I mean, admittedly, all the information was there on the bottle, the date of distillation, the date of bottling, so you could figure it out yourself. But there was no actual date on them. And they've done. That's not particularly good English. They've gone down the similar route to some of the other independents, and they are colour coding the various regions where the whiskies come from. And on the whole, I think they look pretty smart. And but as with anything, it's all about the juice that's in the bottle, isn't it? So I think that's enough of that. If you want any more information on the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, you can obviously find it on their website or elsewhere on web, as they say, up north. Although we're not very up north, really. Anyway, so let's have a look at today's lineup. Okay, so as I said, I've got quite a fair amount of, fair range of bottlings of theirs to have a look at. These are all, incidentally, I'm in the new livery, so I'm guessing they're sort of 2017 bottlings. And we're going to kick off with one called G15.1, titled "Lead Us to Temptation," which is a grain whiskey from the Loch Lomond Distillery, 9 years old, distilled in January of 2008, bottled in April of 2017 from a second fill bourbon hogshead, and bottled at 48.6%. So I like the fact that you get all the information, although some of it I didn't know. But anyway, the second bottle we're going to be looking at is Lowland. This is a 16-year-old Auchentoshan. It is 5.58 and called Contrapuntal Harmony. I think I've pronounced that correctly, but anyway, so it was distilled in October of 2000, I believe bottled sometime in 2017 at 55.9% from a first fill charred ex-red wine hogshead. Try saying that when you've had a few. The third bottling we'll be looking at is the first of two of the entries into the Campbelltown. This is 93.76 and it's called Beurre, oh, good grief, get my teeth in, Beurre, Blanc and Blue Steak. It is from the Glen Scotia Distillery. It's an 11-year-old distilled in March of 2005, bottled in sometime in 2017, and this was bottled at 61% from a recharred ex-bourbon barrel that was probably tighter than a gnat's chuff, I think, judging by that ABV. The second of the two Campbelltowns again is a Glen Scotia. This is 93.78 and it has been titled Like a Vintage Dessert Wine, and I suppose you can see why. It's certainly got that kind of colour, and it says obvious Oloroso, but to me, which indeed is a second fill Oloroso, but to be precise, distilled in March of 1992, bottled last year, and it is a 26-year-old and bottled at 53.3%. And finally, we're going to look at two samples that they entered into the non-Scotch section. The first one we'll be looking at is 134.1 Exotic Rainforest Fruit 2010 6-year-old, otherwise known as the Paul John Distillery. This was a single refill bourbon barrel distilled in February 2000, again bottled in 2017 at 57.9. And the final bottle we'll be looking at is 133.1, titled Speakeasy Sneaky Peeky. interesting. And so this is a 5-year-old from the Westland Distillery, distilled in October of 2011 and bottled in June of 2017. Obviously first fill American oak. This is heavily toasted first fill virgin American oak. So so yeah, that's today's interesting little lineup, and let's kick off with some grain then. Right, okay, so we have a 9-year-old. It's not Lomond grain. Not expecting a great deal out of a 9-year-old grain, it has to be said. But let's see what the nose gives us. Quite fresh, crisp, quite neutral, reasonable amount of oak, slightly toasted. You can certainly smell the char, which is quite interesting. It's not as heavy on the vanilla as you might expect, and I'm getting more of that kind of tight charred oak. It's a bit young, it's a bit crisp. It gives you a bit of a nose tingle, shall we say? In actual fact, I mean, it is quite pleasant. I mean, you know, it kind of is what it is. It's a young grain whisky, and there's certainly no off notes. It's certainly not spirity. It's a bit, like I said, a bit kind of neutral, but I'm guessing, but that's what to expect, I suppose. And it's not too heavily oaked. I mean, it could have been all oak and no trousers, but you know, it's pleasant. What did I give it? I gave it 8.3 in actual fact, which I think has been pretty generous. 8.3 out of 10, I hasten to add. Let's see what the palate gives us. That's got a lovely juicy finish in actual fact. Getting apricot and almost kind of barley notes, not quite. Cereal possibly, but we're not talking young oily cereal. We're talking sort of, you know, relatively developed cereal kind of notes. It kind of kicks off with a lot of oak, a lot of the sort of, you get toffee and coffee, caramel, but the alcohol and the sort of like graininess comes in quite quickly to kind of like offset that, and you then get the fruit, a little bit of spice on the finish, and it's got an almost kind of Sauvignon Blanc-y kind of sort of herbaceous finish. So I would have said lead us not into Sauvignon Blanc personally, but there you go. I'm not the one that comes up with these names. So that's quite nice. I'm going to put a little drop of water with it, just as I've got enough left to do so, and just see what happens to it. Yeah, let's see what the water does. Now that definitely brings out the oak. I'm getting a lot more kind of cream caramel, clotted cream, touch of coconut possibly, and pretty much zero input from the grain. It's got you can still feel that kind of freshness on the edge, but and actually, you know, I'm getting some fruit coming out now. I'm getting some apricot, so do you know that? I mean, I think that's quite a charming nose. Put a little drop of water with it, and it's nice. Yeah, pleasant. It's brought out some sugars. I'm getting some granulated sugar notes kind of coming through now. A little bit of bittering from the oak on the finish, but nothing to get OTT about. Again, soft, pleasant, still got that kind of Sauvignon-y kind of character. So yeah, I think all in all, I think 8.3 out of 10. I think is a very valid score for that. I think that's very charming. Right, okay, so let's move on to the 16-year-old Auchentoshan. So first fill charred ex-red wine hoggy. Okay, let's see what the nose goes. It's a bit of an odd nose, it has to be said. It's kind of not butyric, but sort of that kind of sort of red winey kind of note. There's a sort of an edginess to it. There's a bit of Turkish delight, but I think that sort of edgy wininess is kind of quite dominant. Yeah, it's got a little bit of a leafiness, there's a little bit of vanilla. It's an interesting nose. It's certainly not unpleasant by any stretch of the imagination. I gave it 7.9, which I think is fair. I think it's kind of, it's good but not very good. Does, with a bit of sort of aeration, it does sort of give a little bit more sort of barleyed, aromatic kind of notes. See what Pal gives us. Very oaky, quite bitter finish, but again you've got that sort of sweet wininess, you've got the intense Turkish delight, sort of rose petal kind of character kind of coming through. I mean, it kicks off with a lot of the winey oak, and has a very sort of dark dried fruit kind of character. It's sort of kind of, if you could imagine somewhere between a wine cask and a sherry cask, that kind of character. And I often tend to sort of, certainly when tasting blind, kind of get blindsided a bit by wine cask finishes, because certainly they can sort of ape the dried fruit kind of character that you get with sherry, and this certainly has that kind of character. I think I like the palate a little bit more than I like the nose. Certainly it's well balanced. There isn't quite the sort of like the edgy butyric note of the nose. It's got a nice progression. Like I said, it kicks off with the oak. You then get sort of, you know, then the character of you get the American oak. You then, well, you kick off with the wine, the American oak. Then you get the sort of like the Auchentoshan character kind of coming through on the end. So progression wise, I think it's quite pleasant. Then the nose just lets it down just a little bit, but aside from that, I think that's a very, very pleasant whiskey. Okay, so let's move on to the 11-year-old Glen Scotia. 61%. No, I imagine I don't know what they fill the casks at Glen Scotia at, but I imagine it's probably going to be close to that. I would have thought 65 maybe. You know, it doesn't smell 61%. It's got that sort of light brininess, quite malty, rounded. It's got some nice kind of tangerine notes, a little bit of lemon, touch of vanilla, very, very subtle dusty peat. Yeah, that's a lovely Glen Scotia, it has to be said. It's got a lightness to it. I mean, I tend to find Glen Scotia to be quite heavy and malty and dark and treacly and not necessarily in sherried either. It certainly has a robust kind of character, I tend to find, and this is showing it. It does have a slightly lighter side, a slightly aromatic side, but again, like I said, it's got plenty of sort of maltiness, although not as malty as you might often kind of come across it, and it's got that fish oil and sort of salt and brine. That's a lovely nose. Incidentally, I gave that an 8.8, which I think is being very, very generous, and yeah, I liked this. I thought this was a lovely nose. Let's see what the palate's like. you would not thought that was 61%. That is so soft and so smooth, and the alcohol is just so well contained. It's more typically Glen Scotia on the palate. It's a bit richer, it's a bit darker, it's more malty, there's treacle, there's toffee, touch of tar, a little bit of salt, bit of fishiness. I mean, that is just absolutely stunning. And you know what, you could drink that neat, and how many 60-odd% whiskies can you actually say that about? I mean, yeah, the alcohol does tingle on the tongue on the finish, it has to be said, but wow, that is really, really good. I like that. Okay, so let's move on to the second of the two Glen Scotia bottlings. This is like a vintage dessert wine, 26 years old, second fill Oloroso, and look at that colour on that. I mean, that is burnished, burnished bronze, kind of copper gold kind of colour. And that is a lovely nose. I mean, you know, I love old sherry noses. Sherry noses, that doesn't really make a great deal of sense. I love the nose on old sherried whiskies, is probably a better way of putting it. It has that sort of Armagnac-y, dusty, dried fruit, prunes, fig, raisin. And again, there's quite an oiliness, a slight tarriness, touch of fish, a little bit of salt. Oh, that's a bloody good nose. And I mean, you know, I don't know what it is about sort of Campbelltown whiskies and sherry. They do work together really well, and it's because I think that the Campbelltown whisky has a big enough personality to kind of stand up to Oloroso. It's got a touch of chocolate, a little bit of dusty spice. Oh, that is a stunning nose. Absolutely stunning. A little bit of violet as well, kind of coming through. It's a sort of nose that I could spend hours sniffing, it has to be said, but if I did that we wouldn't get to the end of this video. Anyway, let's see what the palate's like then, shall we? Wonderfully soft, stunningly smooth, again sort of Armagnac-y, dried fruits, raisin, fig, prune, touch of walnut skin, a little bit of drying tannin on the finish, touch of cinnamon, but it's got that lovely juiciness as well, sort of sun-dried raisin juiciness, a little bit of treacle, touch of salt as well. Oh, the balance on that is absolutely fantastic. That's a lovely cask, it has to be said. So full of personality, character, probably not cheap. I mean, I don't know what a 26-year-old Glen Scotia, well, you're going to be looking at what, I would have thought around about 120, 130 pounds a bottle, maybe a little bit more, but oh, if you've got that money, then damn, that was good. Okay, so let's move on to the 6-year-old exotic rainforest fruit, otherwise known as Paul John. See what those gives us. A lot of Bourbony oak, lots and lots of big vanillins, bit of coffee, bit of treacle-ish sort of notes. I mean, you know, you'd be sort of, I tell you what, I would not have picked this for a Paul John. I mean, I would have certainly been in America with this kind of nose, because it just smells completely sort of American oaky. It's even got that sort of slight corn-like kind of character. So it's basically all cask orientated, this particular nose. I mean, it's not bad, but, and I can't remember what I gave it. I mean, I gave it 8.1, which, I mean, quality-wise is pretty good. I mean, you know, it's got some lovely oak, but I'm really not getting a huge amount more. There's a little bit of barley, there's a little bit of maltiness, but it's certainly mostly oak, well, pretty much 90% oak character, shall we say. Let's see what the palate gives us. Again, there's a lot of oak, bourbony, treacle, quite nutty in actual fact, quite drying on the mid palate, a little bit of spice, bit of tannin, but it's all very soft. Some corn-like character, even a little bit of herbal rye-like notes. And I'm completely in America with this particular whiskey, and it really doesn't say sort of India, it really doesn't say Paul John whatsoever, but it's a good whiskey, it's pleasant. There's a little bit of cereal kind of coming through on the finish, hinting at its youth. I suppose the only thing that I would have expected from a young American whiskey would be that kind of rose petally mild rather than the cereal kind of note. So that might sort of lead you to sort of other places other than America, but because the oak is so dominant, that's what you're essentially completely getting. It's unbalanced, is what I'm basically saying. Not that it's a poor whiskey. I'm going to put a little drop of water with it and just see what happens to the oak. With sort of heavily oaked whiskies, the tendency is with a little drop of water is suddenly the oak all just kind of completely disappears, and it does actually disappear. Although it's still a bit of oak kind of character there. I'm getting kind of more oily sort of barley, a little bit of toasted nuts, possibly a little bit of herbal character. It's probably saying a little bit more kind of Paul John now with water than it did when it was neat. So let's see what the palate's like now. Still quite oaky, although I'm getting a little bit more barley kind of character coming through now. It's less about the oak, the balance is a little bit better. Quite mouth-watering, but on the same time quite drying too. So the balance, I think, is better with a little drop of water, and there's less kind of emphasis on the oak, it has to be said. So all round, I think sort of 8.1 is about right. It is a very good quality whiskey, and certainly I think with water it does kind of like sort of show a little bit more. And this is kind of classic example of where just adding a little drop of water to your cask strength whiskey just sort of, you know, just brings out the sort of like you know, more character, and sort of, you know, just kind of balances it out more. And that's one of the things I just love about cask strength whiskies, because they just do that, you know. So nice. And finally we are on to the American. This is the Speakeasy Sneaky Peeky. For those of you that don't actually know what a speakeasy is, I believe it was a prohibition hidden bar, shall we say. Why it was called a speakeasy, I assume you probably had to speak easily to get in. But anyway, so let's see what the nose gives us on this. Now, for an American whiskey, this doesn't have a huge amount of oak. I mean, yes, it's got some tight kind of oak, charred, burnt wood, some lovely malt. It certainly doesn't have the corn or the kind of not barley, the corn or the rye kind of character. So I'm guessing if this is Westland, this is probably their single malt. A little bit of treacle, a little bit of dried fruit, touch of raisins, touch of spice. Yeah, I like that. That's nice. I mean, I gave that 8.5, which, yeah, I think that's pretty good going. Yeah, some lovely dusty spice notes, some depth. I mean, for a 5-year-old, I don't think that's too bad at all. It's certainly developed some character. There's a little bit of rose petal. There's a little bit of oily kind of almost marry kind of notes, which again does seem to be quite prevalent in young American whiskies. But yeah, it's all well contained. It's all kind of nicely balanced, and I don't mind that sort of marry kind of character as long as it's not the only character of the spirit. I don't mind a little bit of that because it kind of adds to the entertainment value, if you like. Anyway, let's see what the palate's like. It's got a real spicy finish, real cinnamon, dry, soft tannins, charred oak. It needs a little bit more time, I think, for the palate. The palate is kind of like a bit kind of lots of oak initially, and then it just kind of like goes and stops, and then you get, it's kind of staccato. You know, you get oak and then you get spirit. It's a bit kind of but the quality is really good. Like I said, it's a little bit short, it's a little bit kind of marry, it's a little bit kind of youthful, it's cereally. Love the spices though, chocolatey kind of finish to it, but that kind of, it's not that kind of, it's more that, not that real dark chocolate, it's that kind of English chocolate kind of character, which is, you know, lots of oil and vegetable oil and stuff like that. It's got that kind of character to it, and I think for me, I would have just left that a little bit longer. I still think it's great spirit. I still love the character, and yeah, I can see why it was bottled. It's entertaining. It's, you know, it is what it is, I suppose. But I would like to have seen that with a little bit more age. I think probably whoever decided to sort of put this forward probably smelt the nose and said, yeah, I think that's quite nice and it's interesting, it's evolved, and maybe didn't taste it, but then it goes through a tasting panel anyway, so they would have tasted it, so they would have thought that was ready for bottling. My personal opinion, I don't think it actually is, but you know, again, it's an interesting insight into American malt whisky, so why not? Okay, so let's wrap up today's episode of the show. So yeah, some really interesting stuff, I think, that the Scotch Malt Whisky are bottling, and if you like the sound of some of these, then obviously you'll have to join the society to be able to purchase them. The grain, yeah, okay, Lead Us Not Into Sauvignon Blanc, I think, would have probably been a better title for it. For a young grain, I thought it was actually pretty pleasant. Some you know, interesting, you know, combination of flavours and aromas, and you know, for a young grain, which you would expect to be, you know, pretty much all oak, I think it was surprising. The Lowland, yeah, okay, so I think I preferred the palate possibly to the nose. The nose just had that kind of slightly butyric kind of wine character, which, you know, is not inoffensive, or no, not offensive, I should say, rather than inoffensive. It's not offensive per se, as long as you've got other things happening. But you know, it does kind of, it's something you love or hate, really, at the end of the day. The 11-year-old Glen Scotia, yeah, that was really nice. Like that, it kind of showed the sort of, you know, the crisper, the fresher side to Glen Scotia, which you don't often see. And well, I think sort of like with vintage dessert wine, was certainly standout bottling, not because it was the oldest bottling in the tasting, but because it just sort of like had some complexity and character and was just absolutely gorgeous. And you know, and sherried, and you know, sometimes there's nothing wrong with a bit of sherry. The exotic rain fruits of Paul John, yeah, okay, yeah, I was pleasant. I think it certainly needed a little drop of water to sort of just kind of tame the oak and give it a little bit more sort of malt kind of character. Still, I think I would have been hard pushed to sort of figure that one out blind as Paul John. And the final bottling, the Westland, yeah, interesting, possibly a little bit too young still, maybe needed a little bit more time, but you know, I can see why it was bottled. So all round, I think, yeah, an interesting little range and a nice snapshot into what the Scotch Malt Whisky Society is actually up to. So anyway, so that's this week's episode, or this week's second episode of the show in the bag. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you'll tune in next week when I haven't got a bloody clue what I'm going to be doing next week. Anyway, I'll figure it out as I normally do. So all that's left to say is good afternoon and good dramming.